Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight for our presentation, Retain the Rain, Rain Gardens, and Swales. This program is brought to you by Daily Acts and the City of Santa Rosa. We appreciate you taking the time to spend your evening with us to learn how you can build your own rain garden. We're just going to dive right into things. I see people are filtering in. Again, thank you all for joining us. As I give this intro, if you'd like to use the chat to say your name and where you're joining us from, that would be great. And we're just going to get things started. So my name is Ava.
And I'm Morgan.
And we're program coordinators at Daily Acts. We are both super excited to share about rain gardens and swales tonight. For anyone not familiar with Daily Acts and what we do, we are an environmental education nonprofit based in Sonoma County that inspires transformative actions that create connected, equitable, and climate resilient communities. We believe in the power of our daily actions to reconnect people to self, community, and the planet. Our climate resilience programs department is focused on empowering our community to use tools and resources to help conserve water and to live rich and full lives that have a positive impact on the environment. We do this through educational programs such as this one, community installations, hands-on workshops on various waterized topics, and different community mobilizations. As you can see, we are in a Zoom webinar format this evening. This means that for any and all questions you have, please put them in the Q&A box in your settings at the bottom of your screen. We will address all the questions at the end of the presentation. If you have resources you'd like to share or you want to interact with fellow participants, please use the chat box. Again, I just want to emphasize the Q&A is for questions. If you don't put it in the Q&A and you put it in the chat, we might miss it at the end. Lastly, this program is being recorded. This recording, along with supplemental resources about this topic, will be sent out in the following week, so you can share what you've learned with friends and family. Now, a little bit about Santa Rosa's water supply. The water supply in our local drinking water reservoirs, this is an image of them over the past few months. Lake Mendocino and Lake Sonoma have recovered, reaching historically low levels following the last 3 years of severe droughts that are starting to recover. These are some photos here. In November 2022, Lake Sonoma had reached the lowest level in its history. You could see that it's very dry. There's no water in certain parts, very little. Now our reservoirs are back to historic levels for the first time at this time of year. So thank you to everybody for saving water. Now that the reservoirs are full, Santa Rosa City Council rescinded the city's water shortage emergency on March 14th. The water shortage emergency had been in place since June 29th, 2021. Santa Rosa Water is thankful to our community for working together to achieve water savings during this water shortage emergency and for your continued efforts to be water smart. To combat the drought, Santa Rosa reduced water use by 18% and saved 1.8 billion gallons of water. Now, although we are no longer technically in a drought state, that doesn't mean that we could not once again be in drought conditions in the near future if we do not continue to implement water conservation practices. Climate change is still amongst us, and it is very important that we all strive to conserve water more and more. Again, although there's no longer a local water shortage emergency, Santa Rosans still have to comply with the city's water waste ordinance. And this is by doing your part to identify and address water leaks in and out of the home. Now, water waste due to breaks, leaks, or excessive access is prohibited in the city of Santa Rosa. The city of Santa Rosa has a long-standing commitment to water use efficiency and has many programs and rebates to offer. The Santa Rosa Water Smart Yard program provides weekly watering recommendations for your landscape and other great resources on their website. Santa Rosa has a bunch of rebates, and all these rebates are available to Santa Rosa water customers. Here are two relating to landscaping: Castro grass, the city's lawn conversion to sheet mulch landscape rebate. That's $1 per square foot converted, and the irrigation efficiency rebate. Now, you must be pre-qualified before you start the project. So don't start the project until you check out their website and know how to pre-qualify. There are specific requirements to check out those details. There's also a rainwater harvesting rebate. And at this time, it's actually $1 per gallon of storage capacity. This rebate has increased due to grant funds received through the Gold Ridge Resource Conservation District and will remain until either September 2024 or until all grant funds are expended. Again, you must pre-qualify before you start the project. There are specific requirements, so make sure again to check out that website, and that website is all right here. It is the city's Water Smart Center. That's srcity.org/water, or you can call 707-543-3985. And again, we're going to be sending out all these resources the following week. So now we're going to really dive into this presentation about rain gardens. So I'm going to hand it over to Morgan to give a little bit of context.
Awesome. Thank you, Ava. Before we get started in the details of how rain gardens can be used within our own homes, let's work on developing a systems perspective of why this work is important and worthwhile. So starting with our largest water body, planet Earth, or planet water, the surface of the planet is covered in 70.8% of water. Of this water, actually 97.25% exists within the ocean, leaving only about 2.5% within of fresh water that can be potable and used. 2% of that water is stored in glaciers and snow, meaning that rivers contain 0.0001% of fresh water and lakes 0.01%. The remaining fresh water supply is 0.685% of water that's stored in soil and groundwater. The reason this is important is because the amount of water that is stored in the soil is actually 100 times greater than the amount of all the water that's stored in lakes and rivers combined. Therefore, it is necessary that we pay attention to the level of groundwater and recharge our aquifers within our watersheds in order to ensure that we have fresh drinking water available globally. So going from the planet down to our watershed, this is Laguna de Santa Rosa is within the Laguna de Santa Rosa watershed, meaning that all the water that falls within this boundary infiltrates into the groundwater table or runs through the Laguna de Santa Rosa's channels to the Russian River. All the decisions that we make within this boundary has a profound impact on the rest of the watershed and downstream communities. Whether it's a dramatic action like paving a creek bed or letting pollution run into storm drains, this will have a downstream impact on all the communities within our watershed and communities along the Russian River on your way to Bodega Bay or on your way to Jenner. Heavens. The health of this watershed is profoundly important for many reasons, including fresh water supplies, preserving biodiversity, protecting residents from flooding, and more. However, the watershed health also has a profound impact on the climate and the climate crisis itself. To understand how taking care of our watershed is actually an act of climate resilience and also an act of combating the effects of climate change, I want to show this really awesome video that describes its intersections.
When we think about climate change, we tend to think about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere warming the planet. Carbon is so central to our thinking about the climate that many other important aspects are excluded.
It's plugged in. I think the audio is coming from over here.
In the conversation.
Type in the
One
chat
of these
if
things
you can't
is
hear
water.
the video.
Water is actually the dominant greenhouse gas, but its global effects are difficult to measure because it doesn't spread out evenly in the atmosphere like carbon does. Its effect on temperature also depends on the many forms it takes. When it takes the form of a haze, it has a warming effect. When it takes the form of clouds, it has a cooling effect, except for at night, in which it has a subtle warming effect. Since atmospheric water is hard to model, it tends to get ignored. But temperature is not the only important aspect of the climate here. If the climate can be warm or cold, the climate can also be wet or dry. The rampant rise of floods and droughts of our time are said to be caused by climate change, but really they are climate change. While temperature does have some effect on rainfall, floods and droughts are primarily caused by disruptions to the hydrological cycle. We tend to think of the water cycle this way. Rain falls, water evaporates, condenses into clouds, and repeats. But this is only part of the picture, since a lot more happens underground. Healthy soil is like a sponge that soaks up a lot of water. Some of it is taken up and stored by plants, and some of it percolates deep down into aquifers. This groundwater wells up and feeds springs and streams, which allows even more life to thrive. There's then much more water to evaporate from the saturated ground or to transpire through plants. This abundance of water vapor allows for more consistent rainfall. So what happens if we cut down the forest, plow the grasslands, and expose the soil? Without trees or plants to buffer the rain, the heavy downpour compacts the soil. The water can't soak down into the compacted ground, so almost all of it stays above ground and we have a flood. Almost all this water runs off, carrying loads of topsoil with it. And when the rain stops, the little water there is left evaporates very quickly, leaving the ground compact and dry. This lack of percolation depletes the groundwater over time, so it can't feed the streams, which dry up. Now there's no water in the land to feed rain clouds, and we have a drought. If a rainstorm does come, it just creates another flood and worsens the subsequent drought. Instead of consistent rainfall, we have a flood-drought cycle. Fortunately, it is possible to reverse this trend. There are ways to regenerate ecosystems and restore the water cycle pretty rapidly while feeding people in the process. Making subtle changes to the land's topography can slow the flow of water, allowing more of it to soak into the ground and be used by plants. Plants with deep roots help break up the compacted soil, allowing water to percolate deeper. Everyone has a place in reversing the climate crisis. Whether you're working to protect healthy ecosystems, regenerate damaged ones, or just helping yourself or your neighbor depend a little less on industrial agriculture, you are helping the earth heal.
Awesome. Awesome. So as you can see from the video, there's this interplay. You see the interplay of this vicious cycle of dehydration, drought, flood, and fire, with the bad effects just ultimately snowballing. However, what we also see from this video is a virtuous cycle, a positive snowballing, that there are regenerative effects when we hydrate the land by embracing land use practices that conserve water and store water within the landscape. We can actually reverse the effects of climate change and positively impact our society on a systems level. So this is what we would call the current water paradigm. This is how, like, most homes in America are designed to rush water off the landscape, treating rain as a nuisance rather than a precious resource or a gift. As you see in this image, the roof has no gutters or downspouts, so all the water is just sheeting off quickly as fast as it can towards the street. The land itself is eroding away as the water is rushing through the land as fast as it can downhill to get to the street. The tree is planted on a berm instead, so that water that comes near the tree is just directed away from it as fast as possible. There's ponding in the backyard, water causing flooding near the foundation, probably causing a lot of harm to this home. And the arrow on the street is indicating massive flows of water that are coming from uphill homes that are designed the same way, just taking all of the water to the street as it flows down the street at a high rate, it's picking up pollution and heading towards the watershed, bringing all of this sediment, etc. This is what we call the pipe it, pave it, pollute it paradigm. Instead, we want to embrace a different water paradigm, one that treats the water as precious, that honors water and chooses to rehydrate the landscape. For example, this is called the slow it, spread it, sink it paradigm, where when water falls on the landscape, instead of rushing it off, we want to actually slow it as much as possible so that we give it more of an opportunity to rehydrate the land. By spreading it in basins, and it allows more opportunity for it to sink into the landscape. So this home has gutters, and the gutters are that is capturing the water is directed into a rain tank. That rain tank is going to irrigate a garden out front. It's also feeding into a area where a tree is planted. And instead of being planted on a berm, this tree is planted in a convex landscape, a basin, where the land is, there's an intentional depression in the land so that the water that's flowing through actually collects in this depression and irrigates the tree every single time it rains. That back area where it was flooding before, instead that water is going in and irrigating this beautiful tree, and that's bringing shade and multitude of benefits to the neighborhood. One last piece that I'd like to, or two things, that there's a rain garden that is convex in a basin on the right side of the image, where water from the hardscape is being directed into, and then also the sidewalk strips where there's those trees that are planted. You see there's something called a curb cut on the image, where the water that's flowing up from uphill is actually able to enter into that sidewalk strip area, and there's a basin that is dug there so that water, instead of flowing down the street rushing to the nearest stream, it's actually feeding this area that is planted. So that's an example of a way that this is an example of how a way that basins can be used on a landscape to rehydrate the land.
Before we dive into rain gardens and how you can build your own, I'm just going to go over a few definitions that will help in the context of this presentation. So what's the difference between stormwater and rainwater? Well, stormwater is water that has hit the ground, which originated from precipitation. So once it hits the ground, it becomes stormwater. And stormwater can carry a lot of pollutants. It is a lot harder to be captured, and really you don't want to. And it's not great for your plants because of oil residues. Once it hits maybe a driveway or street, can have fertilizers from gardens. Now, rainwater is water that falls on a roof from precipitation and can be harvested into storage tanks prior to contamination, or can be sunk into the ground. This is high quality water, slightly more acidic, so your plants will love it. And it's like capturing what would become stormwater and what really is stormwater. So there's two ways of harvesting rainwater. There's active rainwater harvesting and passive rainwater harvesting. Active rainwater harvesting is the utilization of water harvesting tanks that capture and store water in times of plenty to make readily available in times of scarcity. Now that's using tanks to capture water and using to irrigate your landscape. But passive rainwater harvesting is the utilization of water harvesting earthworks to create a living sponge to capture, infiltrate, store, and use these waters to grow more life in resources. So I said the word earthworks, and earthworks is the operations connected with excavations and embankments of earth. So to put that a little bit more simply, it's digging holes and building hills. And it's doing this intentionally for more ecosystem benefits and for water conservation. As Morgan was saying, to capture the water on a landscape instead of it sheathing off and just going into the drainage. So this is a way to keep it on the landscape, recharge aquifers, recharge the groundwater, bring back new life. So today we're focused on passive rainwater harvesting and using earthworks in order to do that. So what is a rain garden exactly? This infographic here really shows it pretty nicely. A rain garden is simply a depression in the soil which slows and infiltrates the rainwater. It's really just, again, a purposeful depression that helps to slow the water. Rain gardens are created through earthwork processes. So you're going to excavate the soil and build up the sides, which we call berms. Rain gardens help to achieve that paradigm that Morgan was talking about by keeping it on the landscape. Rain gardens have a ton of benefits. Not only are they helpful to recharge the groundwater, they help filter pollutants. And if you have flooding on your property, they help mitigate flood issues. Swales can push, you can direct the water to other areas on your property to infiltrate and move it away from your foundation in your home. And not only that, they're really aesthetically pleasing landscape elements and make some beautiful curb appeal. Rain gardens can or cannot be planted depending on your preference. Personally, I would almost always recommend planting in your rain garden in order to help decrease the soil erosion on the sides and also increasing the ecosystem benefits of your site, such as bringing in more pollinators and providing habitat. So another strategy for passive rainwater harvesting includes swales and berms, or sometimes bioswales. So generally a swale is used to refer to a depression that conveys and drains water. Similar to rain gardening, however, it's taking the water and directing it elsewhere. Often a swale to a rain garden is pretty common. So, and often a swale is built on a contour. It is built to slow spread and sink water flowing down a hillside by, if you go perpendicular, build a swale perpendicular, as you can see in this little image here, there's a slope going down and it's, instead of sheathing off the land, it's being caught because we're building that perpendicular to the hill. A swale becomes a bioswale when it's planted, and plants can really help filter the water and filter any pollutants out of there. So, typically a berm is built on the downside hillside of a rain garden or a swale. And this is to retain the water a bit more. So it's really just a small hill, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to build those a bit later. So again, it could be planted on the berms, and then sinks down the water into the aquifers. So we have a few little images here. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is a landscape that is going downhill, and there are swales that are built in on the contour, so perpendicular to the slope, and berms that are planted. So this helps to slow down water. This is the Kavanaugh Recreational Center in Petaluma, and you could see there are swales all the way around this landscape, and it really helps to slow down the water and makes these plants super happy and healthy, and it's just a really beautiful site. Our last little example is the Santa Rosa Sustainable Education Garden, and this is located at the City Hall, Santa Rosa City Hall building. This includes a garden that contains a series of water saving features from large rain tanks, swales, rain gardens, climate appropriate plants, and you can actually visit this in order to get a sense of how each feature is related to one another and how the whole system works harmoniously together. So how do you build these? We're going to get into that. And what tools are you going to need in order to make one of these on your own landscape in your own home? So some of the tools and materials that will be needed are string or rope, some stakes, landscaping marking paint or flour will do the trick. You could also use landscaping flags. You want spade shovels, a pickaxe is helpful, rakes, gloves. Now, having a level is very important. So you could use a carpenter's level or a straight board, a string level, or a bunyip. So a bunyip is really, it says here, 2 sticks with plastic tube, tape, and marker, and it marks the level. So if you ever kind of played with water as a kid, it's this tube with water in it, and as you pick it up on one side, the water will show where it's at. So you can look this up more online, and we'll include resources more where you can find or how you can make a bunyip. You're also going to want compost, mulch, and maybe river stones or larger rocks for just aesthetics, tarps, wheelbarrows, and there's a great resource called the Santa Rosa Tool Library where you can actually rent these tools for free. So now that we've given a general overview of what a rain garden is and what a swale is, what it looks like, and what you'll need, we're gonna really get into how you can build your own. We will cover every step of the process and of course, design considerations as well. So here are the 6 steps to installation of a rain garden. Number 1, selecting your site. 2, perform soil infiltration test and sizing the rain garden. 3, excavate the existing soil and building berms. 4, backfill with amended soil. 5, mulch. And 6, planting and adding supplemental irrigation. So let's dive into it. I'm going to hand it off to Morgan again.
So when working to identify the site, there are multiple steps and considerations to designing your rain garden. So first and most importantly is long and thoughtful observation. So if you're building this rain garden, you have been, hopefully you've been at your site for a little bit of time, and you've taken the opportunity to watch how water falls and understand where does water flow, where does it collect, and where does water drain away from your site. Are you noticing areas where there's ponding? Are you noticing areas where there's erosion, perhaps? So these are all good questions to informing where you might want to place a rain garden and where it would be the most effective to resolving a problem. Ask your questions, what is working? Where is water draining away? Or where is water saturating the soil? And like, I see that the grass is a little greener, or my plants are a little happier in this area following a rainstorm. What is not working? Is there ponding? Is flooding getting close to your foundation? All of these are really important questions to answer before you start digging and selecting your site. So additionally, you would also want to identify a drainage area. So a drainage area is the area of where water is falling and where that will eventually drain to your rain garden. So if you are placing a rain garden that is fed by a downspout, which is something is a lot of what we'll be talking about, then your drainage area is just the section of roof that drains into your downspout. So if you have like one side of a roof and there's 2 downspouts, then you're only pulling from one downspout, then your drainage area is half of that section of roof. Furthermore, you can have other drainage areas. So if you're noticing that you're having a lot of ponding or water is flowing down from a hillside, then that hillside and all of the water that is falling on that hillside might be your drainage area. You might want to create some slopes or some swales in order to direct that water to a rain garden. Other options for drainage areas are hardscape. Do you have a parking lot and that water that falls on the parking lot will sheet off into your landscape? It's possible to capture that water. So it's really important to consider what drainage area is that you're capturing the water from in the landscape. Furthermore, there's considerations such as solar aspect. It's ideal to have your rain garden in an area that receives a lot of sun. It will increase with the amount of water that it will both infiltrate and be lost through evaporation. And also a lot of our rain garden plants also prefer sun. So, but shade is not a deal breaker. A pretty important one are existing trees. Don't dig within the drip line of a tree. The drip line is pretty much the area, the canopy area on the ground. So if you look up and where the branches are extending to down to the ground, that's about the drip line of the tree. Reasons that you don't want to do this is that roots will definitely be expanding into this area. And when you're excavating several inches down, you might run into roots, and you don't want to damage them. And also, if you're completely saturating the roots itself that are exposed from your digging, you might actually increase risk of root rot. So it's best to not have your rain garden directly under a tree. Utilities, you don't want to be digging and put your spade in and break open a water line or destroy the PG&E line. So it's really important that you call 811 dig before digging. I did it this morning. It just takes 2 days, 2 business days, and you have to mark off the section of land that you plan on working in, and all of the public utility providers in your area will come to your site and mark where the utility line is so that you don't risk breaking it. Because if you don't do this, you'll be held liable if you do break a line. So very important step. Further site considerations is soil type. So the different soil type that you have affects the drainage rate and the storage volume. Compost can be used to help with absorption if you have a very non-absorptive soil type. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Additionally, slope. It's really important that it's sort of intuitive that your rain garden should be placed downhill of a catchment area. You're not going to be able to move that water back uphill. Slopes of more than 5% require special attention. When you're doing these kinds of earthworks, you are sort of manipulating the way that water is moving, and if you do it wrong, you could increase erosion. And so on slopes of more than 5%, we recommend the bioswale, on contour bioswale systems that Ava was talking about previously, and consulting additional resources. For slopes that are 10% or greater, definitely a qualified engineer should evaluate the site before you start trying to manipulate it. Slope is rise over run. So if you go down 2 feet over 20 feet horizontal distance, that's a 10% slope. Just good to check if you're trying to do this work on sloped areas, because earthworks work really great in spaces where there's elevation change. It's just really important to be done correctly. Finally, for site considerations, there's some setbacks. So you don't want to build your rain garden within 10 feet of a building or above contour of a building within 10 feet, as in uphill, because if it overflows, you could risk flooding your building. 10 feet, if it's within 10 feet of the building, you might risk really saturating that soil and the foundation could start to slowly sink. Don't want to construct within steep slopes or bluffs, near septic tanks or drainage fields, at least 50 feet if uphill from the septic tank, but 10 feet if downhill. Not near wells, about 100-foot setback from drinking water wells, near over utilities where there's high groundwater in the winter, because a lot of the times you're directing a lot of this water, concentrating it in this area. So if you're already having really high groundwater, you're just going to be sending a lot of water that's not going to infiltrate, and you might create a flooding issue. In spots that don't drain well, however, with clay, there are methods to increase the infiltration, but it could be better to do it elsewhere. And then furthermore, in areas that would disturb healthy native soils, trees, and other vegetation. So testing your soil. The soil infiltration test is a pretty quick and simple process. So you'll want to dig a hole you can dig it any depth, usually about 12 inches, and you will fill it with water to the very top and set a timer and see how much it drains in an hour. While this is how you can test the drainage. And we want water to drain down. So it's important that when you do this, you actually want to fill this hole 2 or 3 times before you actually do the test. Because especially if it's in summer and your soil is dry, what will happen is the water will actually just disperse horizontally into the soil if it's dry. So by doing it 2 or 3 times, you're really saturating the soil around it. And when you do it that 3rd time or that 4th time, that will be the more accurate drainage rate that will exist in winter. So inches per hour, that's how you can calculate the inches per hour for drainage. So an infiltration of less than 1 inch per hour, you probably have some pretty clayey soil, which clay is poor at infiltrating water. It actually water tends to spread outwards more than downwards. So you use your infiltration rate and your soil type to determine ponding depth. Ponding depth is when you are finished completing your rain garden, how the distance from the bottom of the rain garden to the top of the rain garden. Now, when you're excavating, you're actually going to go deeper than this because there's going to be a process of backfilling with a rain garden soil mix and with mulch. So with clay soils, you're going to want a 3-inch ponding depth at the end, but that also does mean that doesn't mean that you're not going to be excavating much deeper at first. So for sandy loam is really anything that's infiltrating more than 1 inch per hour. You're safe to go 6 inches. The reason for these differences based off of infiltration rate is that rain gardens must fully infiltrate and within 72 hours. So this isn't a pond. We're not creating a pond in your front yard. We are directing water that will sink into the ground table. If water exists more than 72 hours, you increase the likelihood of mosquitoes and other vectors reproducing. So it's really important that you engineer them in a way that all the water that is directed there will sink within 72 hours. So that's why these recommendations are in place. So sizing for ponding depth is the first step. And then the second step is determining the minimum square footage that you need your rain garden to be. When you look up online, it will say that the square footage of your rain garden should be 10 to 20% the square footage of your drainage area. However, this is an additional way to calculate the square footage. So you want to make sure your rain garden can handle the amount of water that will enter during an 85th percentile storm. An 85th percentile storm is a storm in which the amount of precipitation within 24 hours is greater than 85% of all other storms that happen in Santa Rosa. It's just a statistical name, but it pretty much is just like a very high intensity storm compared to the average. So we want to be designing to consider to handle maximum flows. So that's why this is our benchmark. So we want to make sure that our basin can handle that amount of water. So first, the step will be calculating the approximate volume of input. So how much water is flowing into my rain garden during this high intensity storm? So a good rule of thumb, keep in the back of my head, is that 1,000 square feet of roof receives 600 gallons of water in 1 inch of rain. So that means that approximately 0.6 gallons per inch per square foot of your drainage area. So that's a good way to be able to calculate how much water is coming per inch of your. So if you know that your drainage area is 200 square feet, you can calculate about how many gallons are coming in 1 inch. So in order to calculate the 24-hour inflow of an 85th percentile storm, you're just going to take your drainage area and multiply it by 0.6. And then the Santa Rosa 85th percentile storm is 0.92 inches. So we'll multiply it by 0.92 in order to get that exact amount. So now that gives us the amount of water that we're handling, that we need to be able to handle. So we want to calculate the ideal volume. So that's about the volume that we want our basin to be. So we need to calculate the square footage. So volume is the classic length times width times depth. And then in order to get gallons, we've multiplied it by a conversion factor of 7.48 gallons in a cubic foot. So square footage times your depth. And if you see on that bottom line, it's depth divided by 12 because we're working in feet now, and your depth is 3 inches. So if we're trying to convert it to feet, it's 3/12. Just good to keep in mind. And that will give you the amount, the square footage, the minimum square footage that your rain garden should be in order to handle an 85th percentile storm. I know that's a lot, numbers, math, but here's a little example of how to use this calculation. So if I want to direct a downspout from my 200 square foot roof to my rain garden, and I have clay soil, how large should my rain garden be? So I can see that so I know that my drainage area is 200 square feet. So if I just multiply that by 0.6 and 0.92, which is 0.92 inches in an 85th percentile storm, 0.6 gallons per inch per square foot, that gives 110.4 gallons are going to enter my rain garden in that 24-hour period. So the minimum square footage is going to be that formula that we went over earlier, and that gives us 59 square feet is a good square footage for your rain garden to ensure that it can handle the amount of water that you're sending to it. Of course, all rain gardens, I was going to go over more that rain gardens have a planned overflow. So if it's not big enough, it should be okay. But it is ideal. This is a good process to go through, a thought practice to go through to understand how much water you're sending and how much water you're infiltrating by creating this rain garden.
Okay, so now for the excavation. So now we're really going to start digging the rain garden. So now that you have that ponding depth that Morgan was discussing, you're going to dig down using that spade or a pickaxe through the existing soil to get to that ponding depth. So whether it's 3 inches, 6 inches, but you're actually going to dig further. You can see in this photo, there's level. You'll be using that once we backfill to make sure that it's level. We're going to be amending the soil, which I'll be talking about momentarily. But again, so you're going to dig it up, and you want to use that existing soil that you're digging as a berm on the side. You can see in that photo on the left that soil is starting to build up. And we want to make sure that's compacted on the side for the berm so it doesn't erode. But the middle, we don't need to compact it too much because we want the soil to infiltrate. So let's say it was very clay dense and we're only digging 3 inches to the ponding depth from above, not from the height of the berm, but from for the ponding itself. You're actually going to dig a lot more than that. because we're going to mix this with compost. So if you have a loam soil, you're going to want to dig to your ponding depth and then about 2 to 3 inches below. And you just want to break up that soil because we'll be adding compost to it. If it's a clay dense soil, you want to excavate that soil, maybe put it onto a tarp. In this photo, you can see there's a tarp on the side with the existing soil because that's probably was mixed with some compost. So if it's clay dense, you want to remove quite a bit and then we'll backfill. So I'll talk about the backfilling momentarily again. And next we're going to just talk about the inflow and the overflow. So the inflow and the overflow is really how do we get the water to the rain garden and what happens when it fills up. So on this image on the far right, you could see that it says inflow. That's the where the downspout might be from your roof, or maybe it's just the uphill side and there's water coming down. You can do a channel and a swale or a bioswale, or you can even pipe it all the way to your rain garden. So that would be the inflow. You dig, and there's a ponding area there. You can see that ponding level. This one is a planted rain garden. There's that backfill that says the rain garden soil mix that I was talking about, and we'll continue to talk about mulch layer, and then the overflow. So the overflow always needs to be lower than the inflow. This is where you would use that bunyip I was talking about, the way to find the level and the height. You could also use a string level. You want to make sure that overflow, again, is lower than the inflow. It doesn't have to be by feet, just a few inches really below to make sure that the ponding area, it's not going to flow back towards your house or to an area that you don't want to flood. That overflow, we need to consider where that's going to go. And again, I'll be talking about that in a moment. So that inflow, again, is where water is entering the garden. Different inlet options are mulch or gravel channel, a bioswale, downspout with elbows and extension pipe for watering all the way to the garden, so you could hard pipe it. You want to ensure that the inlet is sloping downhill towards the garden. So if you are making a channel or a swale, that it's not just level, but it's slightly down. And it doesn't, again, have to be a drastic slope, but it does need to make sure that it's sloping downhill. Water is going to inflow into the upper edge of that rain garden too, that uphill side. So this is just a little graphic of some options, just options 1 through 5. Some of it has hardscapes. So starting on the left, just saying sheeting over into the uphill side of the rain garden. You could use a vegetated swale, a hardscaped channel. You could do the downspout extension, or you could just do it on the surface again. So for overflow, again, the overflow is above the ponding depth, but below the inflow. And that, again, just can't reiterate enough how important that is. Use a level or the bunyip to ensure that height. And you can send this towards another part of your garden. You just want to make sure it's, again, away from the house. Morgan was talking about how important it is to not hurt that foundation. You could send it to a drain pipe, maybe a French drain if you already have one installed or if you're going to install one. So really consider where you want that overflow to go, where it won't be harmful and won't pond for too long. Again, before you pick the site for the garden, really think about that and observe how does water already flow and where does water already pond. So now we're going to be talking about the berms on the side. So they're built on the downhill side of the rain garden to retain water. Not where the overflow is, just maybe a little bit for the overflow, but it's going to be a smaller berm. So it's going to go kind of down. And it's not only for the downhill side of the rain garden, but really just around the rain garden where you feel like it could overflow where you don't want it to. You want to build the berms at least the same height as the inflow and always higher than the overflow. You want this to be about 2 feet wide to enhance durability and stability. You want to berm the side of the slope at like 2 to 1 to minimize erosion. Because this is new soil that you're taking from the rain garden and pitting on the berm, you want to make sure it's compacted a little bit. You don't need to compact the inside of the rain garden, but on the outside, you could just kind of foot tamp it because because it's a hill, you don't want it to just erode off. So just foot tamping. It's kind of like building a sandcastle. You want to make sure it's stable. That's why you have that 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 feet wide for every foot high. It's not a sharp, steep mountain. It's just a calm hill. And what you could do, like a sandcastle, is water it, foot tamp it, and build it up a little higher. Then put some water on it, foot tamp, and build it up a little higher. You can also plant on this berm different plants to help decrease the erosion, because that soil, having the roots help with soil stability. So that's kind of the essentials of the berm. So now to amending that soil that I was talking about. So we're going to mix in organic compost, and this is going to increase the absorption and the retention of the water in the soil. So we call it a rain garden mix. So it's 50% compost and 50% that native soil that was already there. So for clay soil, I was saying you want to excavate deeper and mix up to about 12 inches of that rain garden mix to improve the absorption. If it's a loam soil, just 2 to 3 inches. So 12 inches is a lot to mix in the garden. So you'd want to, again, take it out, mix it, and put it back until you reach that ponding depth. So it's a lot easier for loam because you can actually just mix it right in there. If you just take a pickaxe, loosen up the soil, or a spade shovel, loosen up the soil and add in the compost, then you can mix it and you don't have to take a wheelbarrow or put it on a tarp. But this is an important step because it really does help to enrich the soil and increase that water storage capacity. And then you're just going to take a rake, and when you hit that ponding depth, you're going to backfill it with this rain garden mix. Take a rake. You, again, don't need to compact the soil. Just take a rake and make sure it's level across at the bottom of the rain garden. Now, the next step is mulching. Once you have all that done, all that earthworks is done, you did all that excavation, you built those hills, we're going to protect the soil with some mulch. So there's 2 main types of mulch that people use to put into their rain garden. So there's wood mulch, and people also use gravel or rock mulch. So there's pros and cons to both. So first, wood mulch is really great for your soil. It can improve the capacity for water infiltration, and it also reduces the evaporation potential. And that means that you just need less water from the city, less municipal water demand. So that also helps with water conservation. Mulch breaks down over time and adds nutrients to the soil. It also helps protect against weeds and weed growth. It's fairly inexpensive too. If you call an arbor company, they often are trying to get rid of mulch chips or wood chips. Lastly, it cools the soil. So mulch is a really great additive to put on top and protect that soil. However, some of the cons could be that mulch can float in a rain garden and is pretty common. So when it fills up water, it floats with the water. But however, to fix this issue, you have to get shredded hardwood mulch instead of just a basic arbor mulch. Ask for hardwood because the density of it won't let it float with the water. Now, another con is a con and a pro. It breaks down and it does help that soil nutrients, but you do have to check on that mulch a little bit more regularly, about once a year, and apply more as needed. So there's about yearly maintenance with the wood mulch. Now, rock and gravel as mulch is beautiful, very aesthetic, lower maintenance. However, it is more expensive, no water holding capacity, not as beneficial for the soil or plants, and it actually warms the soil. So clearly I have a lot of pros on one slide compared to this one. Just overall, rock and gravel can be a beautiful element in rain garden, but we do encourage using organic mulch, wood mulch, to feed your soil and really help draw down carbon and increase water infiltration capacity. And rocks really don't add a lot to the soil where wood mulch can.
Awesome. So so now that we've dug the basin, we've amended the soil, we've added mulch, it is ready to be planted with water-loving plants. So there are 3 different zones within a rain garden. So this first zone, zone 1, the bottom, is the basin of the rain garden. This is where water collects and it is held, slowly infiltrating into the ground and recharging the aquifer. Because water will pool here during rain events, the plantings in zone 1 must have the capacity to tolerate periods of inundation and drought, or receive supplemental irrigation. So these are where you're planting classic wetland plants, plants that survive underwater and love to be in water. So zone 2 is the slope of the rain garden. It's indicated here as a terrace, but it also could be the berm, or where the water is sloping downhill, or where the rain garden is sloping down to the basin. These are plants that enjoy to have their feet wet, but don't necessarily want to be fully inundated with water, but will benefit from this additional flow of water in the winter, in the rainy season. And then zone 3 is the top of the rain garden. It's the plants with the lowest water needs and aren't super tolerant of being soaked. However, they are still even though they're not in the rain garden, they're still benefiting from being within proximity of the rain garden because of the groundwater recharge that is happening. The increased water content within the soil. These plants, it's actually pretty remarkable to see how plants that are not even in a rain garden will stay green and healthy for longer when the rain garden exists, just because of the benefit that it's bringing to the soil and the soil around it. So we'll go over a few of those plants. So these are our plant palettes that Daily Acts has created through the Land Resilience Partnership, with our organization sponsor, Watershed Progressive. They helped design these. It's really awesome, and will be sent out in our follow-up resources. But this is all of our recommendations this is our recommendations for zone 1 plants, the higher water use plants that can survive underwater. Classic wetland plants. If you've ever gone for a hike in an area that is a wetland, you'll see sedges, you'll see rushes, you'll see willow trees and walnut trees. One of my favorite here, however, is the blue-eyed grass. It has these really gorgeous blooms and is a really awesome ground cover. There is a recommendation that in the first year, or you want about 80% coverage of plants in the rain garden to stabilize the soil. One of the benefits to planting a rain garden is to minimize erosion, because the plants develop roots that help the soil become stable. So by planting plants like blue-eyed grass, which are sort of ground covers that like to spread out, you and like the other ones, you are stabilizing the soil. So, and also I love this plant palette because it has all of these icons for the pollinators that they attract, and their sun tolerance and whatnot. So for zone 2, there's a series of plants that we recommend. Some of my favorite being the coyote mint and Douglas iris. And then also like common medicinals like yarrow, and also this shrub, woolly blue curls, can be have the most beautiful like purple blooms. Pollinators love it, and they really are like infiltrate water and very effectively. This is once again zone 2, so it's the plants that we recommend to be planted along the berm or sort of where your rain garden might be sloping down towards the bottom of the basin. Zone 3, the lower water use plants that are up on the like mainland before it starts to go down, but yet still providing or benefiting from the rain garden. Plants like elderberry are really awesome to plant here. There's a lot of fruits, elderberry, currant, classic California native plants like toyon and coffeeberry really benefit here. And as you see on a lot of these, there's an icon for erosion control. So these plants have really strong roots that specialize at stabilizing the soil and reducing erosion of the land that's around it. So these are really great plants to plant around your rain garden. Yeah, so just before we wrap up, like you've built your rain garden, you planted your plants, and how are you going to maintain it? So you want to make sure that your rain garden is draining within 72 hours. So if you are observing it and it's not, you're gonna want to check for the sediment buildup and debris such as leaf litter in the overflow, because that could be stopping water from overflowing or just like stopping infiltration. And you want to get that out of there. If you're noticing that it's not draining within 72 hours, the beautiful thing about rain gardens is you can just take your shovel and make interventions to learn from your observation. So if it's not draining within 72 hours, lower your overflow. The overflow could be too high. You could dig it down a little bit. You could dig the berms down a little bit so that water doesn't go so high. If you've dug your overflow so that it's this high, all of the water in the rain garden and throughout the whole basin is not going to get any higher than your overflow. So it's very customizable based off of your own observation. You want to make sure you're irrigating these plants during the dry months until they're established. So if you're planting your rain garden in spring and as it goes through the summer months, those plants are going to need some water to get established. So for the first 2 years at least, you want to irrigate these plants, whether it's with a hose or drip irrigation. That's what we do at Daily Axe is when we install a rain garden, we'll also install drip irrigation so that and just bury it in the mulch so the plants are getting water in the summer months and turn it off when it starts raining. When you start to see bare soil or the mulch is getting pretty thin, just reapply some mulch. Mulch is really like wood chips are really great at holding water. And it's just a good way to maintain the health of your rain garden. Especially combating erosion. So if you see any erosion, you want to plant ground covers, like I mentioned, plants that stabilize the soil. And also any methods of energy dispersion. So if you're noticing water splashing somewhere, by adding, even though we don't really advocate for inorganic mulches like cobbles, gravel, rock, that's what its main benefit is it's really good at combating erosion. So if your inlet is like you're noticing just like a nasty channel forming, it could be good to put some cobbles there and let the water flow through that, and that would decrease the amount of soil that you're losing to erosion. You want to remove weeds. You don't want to put herbicides or any kind of chemical fertilizers in your rain garden. This is water that's infiltrating into the ground table. And yeah, it's all about, so we would never advocate for the use of herbicides. Finally, as I mentioned before, remove debris from overflow. It's really important to make sure that your rain garden is draining properly. But ultimately, it is a low maintenance operation and just requires a level of observation checking in. It's really exciting when you've dug a rain garden and the rains come and you can just go outside and see what's happening. Just leave you with a few inspirational photos. Here's a really awesome rain garden flowing through with all types of zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3 plants in a classic residential front yard. Another rain garden with sort of more of a grassy look with a lot of those classic wetland plants. I see rushes, I see sedges, and then some like larger plants on the outskirts. really lush and beautiful. Yeah, as Eric Olson says, landscapes of water are landscapes of life. By honoring the water cycle, and honoring the water that falls on our landscapes, we are building life, combating climate change, and creating climate resilient communities. So, thank you everybody for joining us, and we're available to answer any questions. And yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody. Again, to reiterate, if you have questions, which I see a few in the Q&A, and we're just going to go ahead and answer those. So if you have anything from your own experience you'd like to ask about, or a project you're working on, please put it in. We have a bit of time for questions. So to read the first one, thank you, Tara, for your question. Are the plants you recommend gopher proof?
Not necessarily. I would say that some additional research of plants that are gopher proof would be good if you have gophers. Sometimes we use gopher baskets in our plantings in areas where gophers are really pervasive.
I would definitely say I don't think there are gopher proof lists. There are plants that gophers don't like as much, but so many native plants and plants in this plant list gophers are going to get to or could. So using a gopher box helps drastically. So it's just like a cage that if you're going to plant using that cage, that the water can still infiltrate through, but you put the cage in, then you plant your plant and the roots can get through and they'll still do really well. And there's other things that can prevent gophers and help decrease gophers. Yeah, gophers can definitely be a problem. We're based out of Petaluma and we definitely have gopher issues. But good luck with the gophers. Okay, another question is, I have a slope of about 20% in one area of my yard where I want to incorporate swales. You mentioned getting an engineer's help, but what type of engineer?
To answer this question, a civil engineer is ideal. If you live in Sonoma County or any county, actually, the resource conservation districts are really great resources. We work closely with the Sonoma Resource Conservation District, and they are a group of civil engineers that specialize in rain gardens and these kinds of projects. So if you're working at a place with a 20% slope, I would definitely recommend reaching out to the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. Also, if you live in Bodega Bay or the Gold Ridge Resource Conservation District services that area, but they'll come out and do an evaluation and provide advice if you just get in contact with them.
There are landscape architects who have work on slopes often. So just doing research, and we can provide in our follow-up email a list. We have a contractor referral list, and there are many contractors who do work on larger sites that we do try to focus on smaller residential sites. But if you have a large slope and maybe a large acreage, there are individuals who specialize in this more, and landscape architects who focus on permaculture and water conservation on these slopes and really doing intensive earthworks. So we can send that contractor referral list.
Hi, Julie. So is there a problem if your berm is turning out to be more than 2 feet wide due to the immense amount of dirt that is being dug up? No,
not at all.
Yeah, the dirt that the berms need to be 2 feet wide is our minimum recommendation. They can be larger. The main thing to pay attention to is the slope of the berm, maintaining about a 3-to-1 slope. So going from the top of the berm to the bottom of your basin. So a wider berm just means more erosion protection, and also maybe makes it so that you have room to plant some really awesome plants up on that berm to stabilize it. So definitely not a problem. Maybe bigger berms are maybe better. So yeah.
Kim, thanks for your question. It says, I tied into my sump pump under my house in addition to the downspouts to flow to my dry stream rain garden. It drains within 20 minutes in heavy rain, maybe because of the mole tunnels. Yeah, that could be it. It sounds like maybe you have good soil too, not very clay dense if it's draining that quickly. And because that sounds like with the downspouts and a sump pump, you must have pretty soil that infiltrates very easily, very aerated. So it sounds like that's pretty good as long as it's not filling up and overflowing because of that sump pump. That's great that it's at least infiltrating into the ground and you're keeping it on the site. As long as it doesn't damage your structure, that seems really great. Oh, and the other Kim also wrote, I have never had an overflow event. That sounds like you have some good soil then. So thanks for sharing. And that's great.
And then finally, I wanted to, there was a question halfway through the presentation that I had answered by text. So Tara also asked that they live in the county of Sebastopol and their downspouts come out and go downhill, and that there's naturally berms on each side of it, so going downhill, but they need to block it off or create a berm on the downhill side. In this scenario, do you need to dig down? So my answer would be that building a berm without digging down, without building a swale or a rain garden in association, would be a positive intervention. It would serve to slow the water down, decreasing erosion, giving it more opportunity to infiltrate into the ground table. However, digging a swale or a basin in front of this berm would only do more of that. So you would increase the amount of water that you're infiltrating. It would allow you to plant some really great plants and create just like a natural rain garden as well. However, if you're just doing the berm itself, still super positive, would recommend. And over time, it actually might create a terrace. So if you dig a berm on a slope, and there's biomass that's coming in, that's being pushed by the water, it will end up building up on that berm, and you might end up with a bit of a terrace, which with some like native soils from decomposed mulch, which is great for planting plants. So either way, I think you have some like awesome opportunities with that downspout to downhill, and also yeah, if that downhill goes towards your neighbors, you're helping out your neighbors as well.
You make sure you don't flood your neighbors. But yeah, I was gonna say too, because that sounds really interesting. Exactly what Morgan's saying. I feel like building a rain garden, kind of like the image that he showed at the very beginning when he was talking about the curb cuts, and that a lot of times we see curb cuts, which are again this kind of cut into the hardscape of a sidewalk curb, and then there's a sidewalk strip to capture the water that's maybe on a residential hill. It sounds kind of like you could do this going down a hill in a way where maybe you have the swale going down and it breaks off into a rain garden, and then the overflow kind of connects back to that swale going down. Sounds like you have a lot of opportunity, and just need to sketch up some ideas. So
and yeah, also, Dara, we will be sending a follow-up email. So if you registered for this event and therefore received the Zoom link, we will send these slides and a plethora of other rain garden materials to guide you in your journey. So yeah, we'll be sending some resources following up. Awesome.
Great. If there's no more questions, we're going to wrap up again. As Morgan said, we're going to send up follow-up resources. Also, there's a lot of opportunities coming up that for tours, and always look at dailyacts.org/upcoming-events or just dailyacts.org to see other opportunities to learn. We have events in person as well to see these things firsthand. Also, just walk around your neighborhood, see what your neighbors are doing with their landscapes, build that community around water conservation. So let's see, any other questions? Yes, that's it. So again, Thank you all. You'll be receiving the resources. This is my email up there. It's ava@dailyaxe.org. This is our office line as well. If you'd like to reach us with any questions, Morgan can also be reached at a very similar email, but it's morgan@dailyaxe.org. So if you have any questions or comments about Daily Axe or about rain gardens or swales, please feel free to reach out to us, and you'll be receiving that email with the resources, with this recording, and everything with this the presentation next week. So thank you all for learning with us, and have a wonderful night.